Hello, everyone. Welcome to the English course for the Language Zone server. So today we're going to be talking about differences between British and American English. There's a saying, an old saying that says, America and Britain are two nations divided by a common language. Now, it's pretty common for you to have heard of the differences between American and British English, and sometimes some of those differences are not as huge as you usually think they are. And well, when it comes to spellings, the main difference is that British English keeps the spelling of words that it absorbed from other languages, which are mainly French and German, while American English spellings are based on how the words are pronounced when spoken. Now, this is not to say that there aren't other differences between the two types of English, but basically most of the time when we refer to the differences between British and American English, we refer to the spelling. So in this lesson, we are going to discuss the other differences in different aspects of English, like grammar, vocabulary, and so forth. So let's go. First of all, vocabulary. The most noticeable difference between the American and British English is vocabulary. Now, there are tons and tons of words. Now, vocabulary, we're referring to the words that they exist, right, in British English, likewise in American English, but their meanings or their definitions, they are used in a certain way in the two different types of English. So, for instance, Brits call the front of a car a bonnet, while Americans call it a hood. So, if you tell an American probably to open their bonnet, I mean, they would actually think you're referring to like the hat and not the car as a British person, which is what you intended to tell them. So Americans go on vacation while Brits go on holidays or holes, as it's colloquially said. New Yorkers live in apartments and Londoners live in flats. Technically, these words do mean the same thing. It's just the use. You'd rarely hear an American say they live in a flat, and you'd never really hear a British person say they live in an apartment. So, but most times, you like in situations of vacation, holidays, yes, you can actually understand what the person is saying, but sometimes where there might be some, misinterpretation or misunderstanding would be like in some situations of using words like bonnet and hood. Right, so next we're going to discuss some grammatical differences between British and American English. So first off, we have collective nouns. A collective noun is a word that refers to a collection of things taken as a whole. So, there are a few grammatical differences between the two varieties of English. So, we're going to start with collective nouns. Now, in American English, collective nouns are singular. Now, for example, staff refers to a group of employees, and a band refers to a group of musicians, a team refers to a group of athletes. So, Americans would say the band is good, right? Now, if you remember the lesson we had on concord, there has to be subject-verb agreement. So, if you are using a plural, if you have a plural subject, you need a plural verb, it has to work together. So the band in American English is going to use a singular verb because the band, regardless of the fact that it's referring to a group of musicians, more than one, it's considered singular. So you have the band is good. But in British English, collective nouns can either be singular or plural. So you could hear a British person say, the team are playing tonight, the team is playing tonight. It just depends on who is saying it. So next we have auxiliary verbs. Another grammatical difference between American and British English is the use of auxiliary verbs. Now, auxiliary verbs, which are also called helping verbs, are verbs that help form a grammatical function. More or less, they help the main verb by adding more information about time, modality, and a voice. Now, let's look at the verb shall. So, Brits use shall to express the future. I shall go home now. I mean, you're not going home now, but you will in the near future. Now, Americans, of course, know what shall means, but rarely use it in conversation because it is going to sound very formal. So, you'd usually hear an American say, I will go home now. Or, well, Americans could use I shall go home now, maybe to a superior in the workplace, but generally it's not very commonly used because, well, it seems pretty formal. Now, in British question form, a British person might say, shall we go now? But an American would say, should we go now? Now, this doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just the way of preference of the speakers of the language. Now, when Americans want to express a lack of obligation, they use the helping verb do with a negative not followed by need. Now, this is, for example, saying, you do not need to come to work today. But British people, you would tend to drop the helping verb and contract not with need. So you'd have, you needn't come to work today, which is, you need not come to work today. Next, we have tag questions. A tag question is a grammatical form that turns a statement into a question. For example, an example is the situation is unfortunate, isn't it? She didn't go there, did she? Or you don't like him, do you? So a tag includes a pronoun and its matching form of the verb be, have, or do. There are rules to make form tag questions, which we could go over in another lesson. Now, so tag questions encourage people to respond and agree with the speaker. Now, the difference here is that Americans use tag questions as well, but less often than Brits do. So, tag questions are basically, it's like a prompting when having a conversation with someone, and it's really not what's the word? It's not a hard thing to form. It's basically just a sentence. You could say, you have work today. You have done your work for today, haven't you? Now, it works more or less like opposites. Like, for example, if in the main sentence the verb you use is not negated, the question tag at the end, which is this, has to be negated. And if the verb in the main sentence is negated, the question tag at the end is not negated. So that's it. Now, past tense verbs. Now, there are Some differences with past forms of irregular verbs. Now, the past tense of learn in American English is learned. Now, British English has both learned and learnt. Now, the same rule applies to dreamed and dreamt, and burned and burnt, leaned and leaned. Now, Americans tend to use the ed ending when talking in past tense, while Brits tend to use the t ending. Now, it's so if you listen clearly, if you listen closely, you would hear a Brit say, "I hope she's learnt her lesson." Doesn't mean that Brits don't use learned, but more often than not, learnt, the past tense with the ending t, is used more. Now, in past participle form, Americans tend to use the en ending for some irregular verbs. Now, for example, an American might say, "I have never gotten caught," whereas a Brit would say, "I have never got caught." Now, Americans use both got and gotten in past participle, while Brits only use got. So, the differences with these irregular verbs, people tend to think, like if someone says, "I've never got caught," someone might say, "Oh, that's wrong." It isn't, so that person probably doesn't speak or isn't averse with British English, but these little differences they don't even hinder communication. Essentially, you basically understand what it is. So, basic difference in past tense is, with past tense, Americans use the ed for irregular verbs, and Brits have both the option of using ed and t endings, but tend to use the t ending more. And in the past participle form, Americans have the option to use got and gotten, while the Brits only use got. So, to move on to spelling. There are several minor spelling differences between British and American English. Now, this is all due thanks to the American lexicographer Noah Webster. Now, well, the name is basically the same one from the Webster Dictionary. So, basically, he was frustrated by the so-called inconsistencies in English spelling, and he wanted to spell words the way they sounded. And spelling reform was also a way for America to show its independence from England. Now, the Webster legacy in American spelling of words like color, from the British spelling with the OUR. The same goes for honor and labor. Now, he dropped the letter U from those words because he wanted the spelling to match the pronunciation. Now, there are some other words that he did, put forward to change them, but some of them didn't make the cut. For example, like island. Okay, there was the So, British and American English have far more similarities than differences. Now, most of the time, the differences are exaggerated unnecessarily, but if you can understand one style of English, you should definitely be able to understand the other. So, we're going to go through some tips that will help you spot the differences. So, here, there's color. Well, words that end in OUR or OR in American English, in OUR in British English usually end in OR in American English. So, you could also find the sample of other differences in the Google Docs document. So that's basically it for today. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.